So I would like first to welcome you so warmly that because of that such a weather you are here. That's wonderful. Wonderful, thank you. Because we have wonderful lectures this morning with a beautiful theme, I think, as a kind of preparation for this coming week. So, compassion, forgiveness. Is there a path from one to another? How is it working? We'll see that this morning with Brian Gray, that you see here. Brian is very well known in the Bay Area and the Sacramento area too, because he's teaching for so many years. And what is he teaching? That's a lot. Because with Brian, we are always at the origin of all what is existing. Yeah, so cosmology is really so gifted to bring us those great mysteries. But he has also the gift to bring us that inner path that he developed, for instance, with the study of Parsifal and Philosophy of Freedom by Rudolf Steiner. It's also something, yeah? So we will see what he has to bring to us this morning. He's the program director at Rudolf Steiner College, main campus. He's the Foundation Studies in Anthroposophy director for many years also, yeah? And then afterwards we will have a break, a snack break, which has been prepared. So we will have to go, and I will show you the way so that you will not get too much rain, to the main hall behind the curtain. We have organized a table for a nice snack together. And then we will be back and listen to Robert McDermott, who is also very well known in our community, although he's a great professor at CIIS. Yeah? And I should not say although, because we are very close friends, and not only on a personal level, but also on the level of the two institutions, CIIS and Rudolf Steiner College in San Francisco. Probably Robert McDermott will open the horizon to other culture and great people who are also very much involved in bringing that compassion and forces of forgiveness in our today world. Yeah? And as he used to say, Rudolf Steiner is unique, but not alone. Yeah? And so we will see what he will bring to us this morning. And we should be done with half an hour of conversation about, those themes, and see what we have in our heart to go away at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
So the title of my talk is From Longing, Suffering, and Self-Involvement to Wisdom, Compassion, Forgiveness, and Love. We live in a time when there's a great deal of misunderstanding. There also is a great deal of wounding going on, and some of the wounding is intentional. But I have to say, from my experience working with colleagues over many years, much of the wounding is not intentional. We tend to trespass into each other's space without actually recognizing the impact that we're having upon other people. And some of what we must learn in terms of compassion and forgiveness is really, it begins with understanding. Yeah. So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to try to understand these different factors that live within the human soul. We live with very different feelings within the depths of our being. And in a certain sense, you could say, Rudolf Steiner speaks about it profoundly, and he says it's not only a human problem, it actually begins with the spiritual hierarchies. So one of the things that we feel in at the depths of our being is we feel longing. So let's explore the nature of longing. Longing is longing for something, yes? So one can say, suppose that you fall in love with somebody. I'm sure this has never happened to any of you, but in case it ever has, let's just pretend, yes? Perhaps we've fallen in love with somebody and we have longed to give our love to this other person. Very basic. So we long to give our love, and our highest ideal, the highest goal of our longing, is to unite our longing with that person. And if our longing to love the other person can be fulfilled, then the longing is satisfied. And the longing ceases. Yeah? Because we have achieved the union that we were seeking. Yeah? Now we know that that's a transitory and temporary state, but nonetheless, because once we have succeeded in satisfying one longing, other longings begin. But nonetheless, we could say, if we can fulfill the goal of our longing, if we can unite ourselves with the one whom we love, then that particular longing is fulfilled. So when Rudolf Steiner describes the nature of longing, he says, what is longing? Longing is actually will. Longing is actually will that has been thwarted. Yeah? Because what happens is, suppose you love someone, you offer them your love, and for whatever reason your love is rejected, or that you're not able to fulfill your longing. The will, instead of being able to realize itself by uniting with another, the will becomes thwarted, and the result of that thwarting is that the longing then, the will to unite, becomes turned back on oneself. The energy, the love that you desired to give, to unite with another, then you have to deal with it. Yeah? If you could have given it away, you've given it away. Yeah? But because you can't unite yourself with another, for whatever reason, it's been thwarted, it's been rejected, then you have to deal with it yourself. And this is the interesting thing, friends, because what happens with longing that can't be satisfied, then turns back to the source of longing, which is the individual who was longing to give. Yeah? And when that longing is thwarted and can't be fulfilled, and it turns back upon the one who is offering it, it becomes suffering. So suffering would not have existed if the longing had been fulfilled. But because the longing, which is actually a will, because the will is thwarted, it's turned back on the individual, suffering is then the feeling. Yeah? Suffering, in a certain sense, is the feeling that one has to deal with because the longing to give one's self to another has been turned back on oneself. Now we have to deal with suffering. But the suffering also has a very interesting effect upon the human being. Again, the suffering wouldn't exist if we could have united our will. But the suffering is now the suffering that leads one to involve oneself with one's own feeling life. And what can happen when one's longing is unfulfilled and one feels suffering, then one begins to think. Yeah, then one begins to think about, if only I could have united with the goal of my love, I wouldn't be suffering. But why am I suffering? And so what happens is one then becomes to think and think and rethink and rethink and rethink the entire problem. You know what I'm talking about, yeah? So what happens is now it becomes thinking. The thwarted will became the feeling of suffering, and now we begin to think about the whole situation. And we think it, and we rethink it, and we rethink it, and we rethink it, and pretty soon we are consumed with it. And it becomes something which festers in our soul, and it actually becomes, our thinking then becomes complete self-involvement. You with me? Self-involvement, I can't, only temporarily during my life am I able to get out of myself because I'm completely thinking about how miserable I am because my longing to unite with somebody was thwarted. Yeah? Yeah? So friends, what happens is then we end up with self-involvement as a result. We generously wanted to love another. We started out innocently, yes? We just thought, here's a person I would like to love. But the whole thing gets turned back on us, becomes suffering, then becomes self-involvement. And pretty soon, we are completely enclosed within ourselves. And the result of self-involvement, as we all know, is egoism. So what started out as a generous intention to give becomes perverted into self-involvement and egoism. Can we experience that? Do we experience that? Yeah. Now, this is the entire problem that every human being deals with, because all of us have been thwarted in one direction or another. Yeah? And of course, the problem is that sometimes we thwart each other. All of us are longing to unite ourselves with something that we feel separated from. We long to unite with those that we love. We long to unite with the work that we feel will fulfill us. We long to unite with the place we want to live and the children we want to work with and the community we wish to be with. We have all kinds of longing, but repeatedly it seems as though the world plots, particularly if you're melancholic, the world seems to plot to thwart you at every turn. And what happens is instead of being fulfilled, one continually then is thrown back and the longing is turned back, becomes suffering, self-involvement, and then once again, one ends up locked up in oneself. Now, because we tend to do this to each other, and we don't realize that we're doing it to each other, we don't really understand each other very well. So we could say we have the problem of egoism, but we also have the problem of how one human being relates to another human being. In many cases, what we find is that a person acting out of their own egoism then has a particular gesture. The gesture is self-involvement. But because we tend to then become a bit blind and deaf and insensitive to others because we're so self-involved, we then begin to trespass into each other's lives. We begin to thwart each other's will because human relationships with other people, because we live in communities, even the relationship with the source of our longing, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with the fact that the person we wanted to unite with for some reason or another is unavailable or rejects us. And therefore, we still have to live in the community with that person somewhere. So how do we come into a right relationship with people? Now, not only the source of our longing, but also we could say because we tend to trespass with each other, we don't mean to trespass into each other, but it's very difficult not to. Just the fact that we share space with one another because we have life rhythms. This morning, my wife and I were packing to leave the room we stayed in last night, and I found myself, when I'm alone, I have a particular ritual, and my wife Marianne recognized it as well. I have a particular ritual, and all of a sudden, here's another person who has another ritual, and those two rituals were interfering with each other. So her getting herself together and my getting myself together created a certain frustration. There was nothing intended there. There was no ill will from either one of us. But the result was a bit of feeling thwarted. Yeah? So the thwarted will, yeah, then the feeling of, oh no, and then, so little things like that. For me, it's not the big things that matter, it's the little things. Where is the dental floss? Those are the things that really bug me. It's not, is there food in the house? No, that's not a problem. Where's the dental floss? It's the small things. So we begin, but what begins to happen then is our egoism. Now we're dealing with our own little world. We're dealing with our own world of self-involvement, but we're in relationship with other people, and we're sharing space with each other. And because we are eating the same food, breathing the same air, living in the same house, living in the same community, we are now connected with all of life. And we trespass into each other's space. We can't drive in San Francisco without feeling trespassed against or trespassing, yes? You both pull up to the stop sign at the same time, bless you, and you then have to make a decision, okay? Do I yield or do I go, yes? And then somebody's going to feel thwarted because, what are you doing? So this feeling, this is a perpetual situation that we live in. And the result of living in a world where we share the same space and we have the same currents and so forth, have the same life that we're sharing, our relationships then lead to certain difficulties as well. And because we're not sensitive to each other, and because we don't really understand why each other is so self-involved, we only know that we're involved with ourselves. So it's very easy for us to do something out of our self-involvement where we're blind, deaf, and dumb to the other person who's also completely locked up in themselves. And then we end up either not giving something we could have given, not yielding, yes, when we pulled up after the right spot, not yielding, not giving something to somebody else. We end up withholding something. We end up withholding perhaps not out of any ill will, but just because we're so self-involved, we didn't notice the needs of another person. Yeah. So then we end up withholding recognition, which is the biggest problem, I think, of our time. We don't recognize each other. We don't see each other. We don't acknowledge each other. There's no gratitude. Yeah? Bless you. So these are problems that we all deal with. Now, we're also not aware that because we're locked up in ourself and because we tend to be trespassing in our relationships to each other by withholding, occasionally, friends, we do cut off the other person intentionally. So not all trespassing is innocent. Some trespassing is intentional. You know what I mean? Yeah. Occasionally we want to make our mark. We want to insert ourselves, and so we intentionally thwart the will of somebody else, yeah, which creates other problems. Yeah. So then what happens is karma begins to evolve, yeah, and we're not aware of the impact we have on one another, and yet now our karma is involved. Yeah? Our individual karma is involved because we've trespassed into the realm of somebody else and thwarted their will. And so in a certain sense, we've diminished ourselves as a spiritual being. We were innocent and naive when we began, but we become more and more responsible for the wounding that we have done either unintentionally or intentionally. We have wounded other people, and in so doing, we have diminished ourselves. We're not the same being that we were when we began our path. Yes. So through the events of all this, our own individual karma becomes burdened. And if we then, in our self-involvement, begin to turn our attention into that, we can also begin to feel guilt, which is actually probably, depending on what we do with it, guilt as the recognition of my error is actually helpful. Yeah? But guilt is a source of continual self-flagellation, and guilt as a further sense of self-involvement is not healthy. Yeah? It's not helpful. If I just use my guilt to turn it back into self-involvement, I just generate more egoism. Yeah? So if I feel responsible for wounding another person, and I feel guilty about that, the answer is not to turn my attention back, not to turn my sense of what I've done back into self-involvement, and because all I'm going to do is lock myself back in the trap. Rather, the question is, what can I do to heal the situation? Yeah. So in other words, if we feel guilt, yes, we feel we have thwarted each other's will, we've trespassed. So we could say, yes, so we trespass, we incur guilt to some degree, we incur karma, we feel guilty that we have diminished ourselves. Hopefully we also feel guilty that we failed to recognize our brother or sister and have somehow wounded them. We feel responsible for not only diminishing ourselves, which is a source of self-guilt, but we also feel, if only I had noticed this need that this person had and had given something of myself to them, they would not be wounded. I was withholding and I could have given something, but in my failure, in my dullness, I failed to do so. So I also have then hurt my brother and sister. Yeah. Now, we have one more thing to deal with here, and that is, there, in addition to this fairly innocent sequence, there is also a very real problem in the world, and that is that not all the spiritual hierarchies are playing by the same rules, if you will. Yeah? So that is that there are spiritual hierarchies there are spiritual beings, our angel, each of us has an individual angel who remembers our identity, who knows who we have been in our previous incarnations, who is with us from the moment of our birth to the moment of our death. Our guardian angel is very much the one who keeps our higher self intact. Our personality, our lower self, goes through the day without really realizing that we are in fact a higher spiritual being and we have a higher self as well. So our angels, our guardian angel, keeps track of our higher self. Really, you could say, holds our higher self until we are ready to birth it. Yeah. But we tend to operate then out of a messenger which is expressing itself in our waking consciousness as our kind of everyday self. We sometimes call that our lower self or our normal self. But in addition to that, we do have a higher self. So our higher self is actually kept for us individually by our angel. Now, suppose that you're going out to have a cup of coffee with a friend. And so you say, there's you and your friend. It's just me and my friend. We're going to go out and have a cup of coffee together. Robert and I are going to go have a cup of coffee and we're going to talk over, which we failed to do, unfortunately. We didn't really have a chance to talk about this workshop. So I'm going to sit at Robert's feet pretty soon and listen to Robert. But he's being very patient with me now, listening to me. So, but if we go out with another person and we say, well, there's just me and my friend, so there's two of us, right? No, actually, there's me and my friend, and my angel and my friend's angel, and then because there are two angels there is an archangel. Yeah? And the archangel is the relationship between the two angels, which is the relationship between the two human beings. So you go out for coffee with a friend and you think it's just me and the friend, but there's actually 5 beings there. You know? There's the two of you, your two angels, and an archangel, who is the relationship. Now the relationship is actually the feeling that we have for one another. The archangel bears, you could say the archangel conveys the feeling that we have for one another. And feelings come in 2 flavors, you know? You noticed? Feelings come in 2 basic flavors. There is the feeling of sympathy, yes, the feeling of moving with another, and there's a feeling of antipathy, the feeling of moving away from another. Yeah? So sympathy and antipathy live in our relationships with each other. We feel more sympathy for certain people, perhaps because they remind us of ourselves, and we feel antipathy for other people, probably also because they remind us of ourselves, but at a layer that we're not very happy about. Yeah? So we have sympathy and antipathy for other people, and that lives within our feeling life. Yeah? And all the time we're living in our relationships with our sympathy and antipathy. However, friends, there are beings, and you can say our angel is actually working in our thinking. The angel is actually giving us the power to think our thoughts. The angel doesn't tell us what to think, but the angel gives us the activity. The life in our thinking is the life of the angel. So when I am having a clear, lucid stream of thinking, the angel is working with us. And the angel is really assisting our thinking. The angel is, again, doesn't tell us the content of our thinking. The content of thinking is up to me. What I think about is up to me. But the activity of thinking, the angel will assist me, will let me think about the most mundane or self-involved things I want, or will the angel, and in fact the angel suffers the more I become self-involved, because I'm dragging the angel's tremendous spiritual power of thinking, I'm dragging it down into selfishness and egoism. But I can also think the loftiest, most generous cosmic thoughts, brotherhood, love, evolution, compassion. I can think lofty thoughts, and my angel soars and gives me the power to think those thoughts as well. So the angel lives in our thinking, and the archangel lives in our feeling. And the archangel rejoices when our feelings are filled with empathy. Yeah. Now, this is something I've been wrestling with. We have, in our feeling life, we have different levels of feeling. We could say in our feeling life, because feelings tend to be polarized into sympathy and antipathy. Feeling along with another or feeling in opposition to another. In our feeling life, we tend to move in one direction or another. We move more into antipathy in one direction and more into sympathy in another. So our sense of self, which is kind of living in the middle, we feel sympathy for certain people in certain situations, and we feel antipathy for other people and other situations. But the problem with both sympathy and with antipathy is that we are swept up in it. We get caught up in our sympathy for another person, and it somehow becomes, we then lose objectivity. You know, if we're caught up in our sympathy for someone, we can't necessarily stand objectively with them and be of help to them. We're just swept up in the sympathy. Yeah. So feelings have a way of carrying us along. They become emotions. Yeah. I love what Dennis Klosek says about feeling. He says, an emotion is a feeling out of control. Yeah. And our sympathy can go out of control and become an emotion. Yeah. And also our antipathy is a feeling which can easily go out of control and become an emotion. Yeah. So we could say, the problem with the feeling life and the problem that we are burdening our archangel with is that there are certain adversarial beings who aren't just content for us to move back and forth in sympathy and antipathy. They want to harden our feeling life, and they want to present the opposite of what we really are longing for. What I think, friends, what we're really longing for, we're longing for empathy. If we have empathy, that means our I is present, but able to move easily and retain its balance. We're able to move into sympathy where it's needed, but not lose ourselves. And we're able to move back into objectivity, because sometimes we need then to be able to, if we're moving too closely to someone with our sympathy, we also need to be able to objectively detach from the sympathy and stand back and get a little objective idea about what would be helpful. So empathy would actually be a feeling life where the ego is more or less directing the flow of feeling. Yeah? Where the ego then enters in. From the point of empathy, we can move very fully into sympathy. We can also move very fully into antipathy. And we should feel antipathy for things which are wrong. Yes? But empathy means that the ego somehow has been able to enter into the feeling life and bring balance, maintain self-awareness no matter where we are. And in so doing, then we don't get lost. It doesn't become emotion. It actually becomes feeling then becomes an organ of perception. So empathy might be a chance for our feeling life to come into an organ of perception. But there are beings who would harden our feeling life into hatred. Yeah? Instead of being able to move with another, or moving in opposition to someone because we feel they're incorrect, or we don't feel that way. And as opposed to having empathy, we have the problem would be hatred. Yeah? If instead of empathy, hatred would be a hardening of the feeling life and an absolute refusal to move. A refusal to move. In fact, not only a refusal to move, it becomes a destructive power that works not only upon the one who is hated, but also works back in a negative way upon the relationship one has with one's archangel, and it becomes a difficulty. Yeah? Is this making sense? A little bit? Now, so we could say our angel is working in our thinking life, and in our thinking life we're searching for truth. Yeah? We're searching for truth occasionally we make mistakes as well. So in our thinking life, there's also a polarity. In our thinking, we're searching for truth, but occasionally we find errors. Occasionally we make mistakes. So in our thinking, we're also living in a polarity between finding the truth and making mistakes. And our angel rejoices when we're able to come to truth, and our angel suffers in a certain sense when we make mistakes. But somehow, the interesting thing is, friends, is we learn almost as much from our mistakes as we learn from the correct thinking that we do. So the result of thinking, even in making mistakes, even in coming to errors, again, if the ego is present in this situation, if we are present in the activity of thinking through a problem, making mistakes, coming back to correct it, gradually our thinking develops the capacity for understanding. Yeah. So when the angel rejoices when we understand. Yeah? The angel rejoices when we find correct truth, but the angel also the angel suffers when we make mistakes with their thinking, but the angel rejoices when we understand the situation, when we stand under a truth. Yeah? And the thing about understanding is we stand underneath it. Yeah? We don't own truth. We are never correct. We think we are, particularly if someone else is wrong and we're right. We think, I have the direct line to the truth and you don't. Yeah? Isn't that a problem? So there's no humility. If I am the only one who's right and everybody else is wrong, there's no humility there. And there's also a big problem. Yeah? Because I don't have the straight line to truth. Nobody does. We stand underneath it. Yeah? We call it understanding. So no one has direct control of the truth, and no one is 100% right. Yeah? Therefore, but if we begin to realize that we stand under truth, then we begin to play our rightful role as human beings, because we realize we're just as capable of making mistakes as we are of being accurate. Yeah? And so a good mantra, someone recently told me a story of a monk who went into Thailand and meditated for 17 years, and he had been a very successful businessman but felt unfulfilled, so he went to Thailand and meditated for 17 years, and finally he came to the place where he felt the need to leave because he also didn't feel unfulfilled. But this person had a particular attitude about life. And so he went to the head monk as he was leaving the monastery, and he said, so I just feel that, I've been here for 17 years, and it's been good, but do you have any advice for me? Any mantra I should take back into the world? And the monk said, I could be wrong. Yeah. What a wonderful mantra. Yeah? I could be wrong. So that would, that might place us in a situation where we could possibly realize, maybe I don't stand in truth, maybe I stand underneath it. I could be wrong. That puts the possibility that maybe there's something I don't know. In fact, maybe my judgment, maybe my conclusion about what another person is doing and why is flawed, because I really don't understand. I don't understand what they're actually doing. I just know that I'm right and they're wrong. Yeah? And therefore, I'm on my standpoint, and this is where I stand like Martin Luther. God help me, this is my standpoint, and the Pope is wrong, and I'm going to nail my 95 points to the church wall. Yeah? So these are all the flaws I see. I'm right, and the Pope is wrong, and the church is wrong, and so here's my standpoint. But if this is our standpoint, that's lovely, but Rudolf Steiner suggests that we should be able to really occupy all 12 standpoints and defend every one of them. He says if we really want to begin to understand something, we need to be able to see it from 12 different viewpoints and completely defend and validate that point of view, even though it's opposed by other points of view. Yeah. So if we really can stand and move from all 12 points of view, then you could say we understand. Then we stand under the truth, which is a bigger truth. But as long as I'm standing on my standpoint and I'm right and everybody else is wrong, that's a problem. That's egoism once again. So our thinking is searching for understanding, but there is also the problem that the spiritual hierarchy, there are spiritual hierarchies who don't really want us to understand, and they harden our thinking into doubt. They say, you'll never really understand. There is no truth, or you'll never be able to know it. Yeah? And therefore, give up. Yeah? So doubt is actually the opposite. Doubt weakens our certainty in relationship to the truth. We want certainty in truth, but what we're given rather by certain adversarial beings, by the beings who want to thwart our angel's activity, we are given doubt instead. And doubt is a very important state of being. But we can't stay there because we become paralyzed. We become unable to think through any problem because we doubt that we'll ever get to the truth. And so if there is no truth, or if we doubt we can ever achieve truth, then we can either give up or just become pessimistic or whatever. So doubt is really, in a certain sense, the problem that we have to deal with in our thinking. And we could say hatred is a problem we have to deal with in our feeling life. What's the problem we have to deal with in our will?
Fear.
Yes, in our will we have the will which is able to flow. I can't do this quite so easily with the will. We can say what the enemy of will is. The enemy of will is absolutely is fear. Fear paralyzes the will. And there are adversarial beings who would like to stop the will. The will is actually a very mysterious thing, more difficult to talk about than thinking and feeling, because the will is this mysterious power which flows through us, but where we're mostly sleeping. We're mostly sleeping in our will, we're dreaming in our feeling life, and we're most awake in our thinking. So there is something up here, and I'm not going to venture at the moment to put it up there, but you could say the will is also polarized in a certain sense. And what would prevent the will, let's just put it up there as a possibility with a question mark, and let's leave it. Maybe Robert can solve this riddle. Yeah. But you could say when will becomes paralyzed, fear will paralyze us. Fear will prevent us from doing anything. So fear, in a certain sense, is the opposite of longing. Longing is a desire to kind of unite ourselves, but fear also can stop that. Fear can thwart us as well. Sometimes we thwart ourselves. We could offer our love. We could offer our gifts to another person, but we're afraid to do so. Yeah? We see a homeless person, we could do something for them, but rather than get involved, we say, no, that person's going to want more than I want to give, and I just don't have time, or whatever. We make excuses. Yeah? And so we're afraid. We're afraid to give something. We actually could give something, but we're afraid. Yeah. So we could say, in a certain sense, what we're striving for compassion. We could say perhaps desire, will, longing. The different levels of will are all active in this polarization. But you could say, if I understand that a person needs something, I can understand it, but not involve myself at all. It may not touch my feelings. It certainly may not touch my will. So I can understand a person, but still be detached. Now, however, I can understand a person and also, as Bill Clinton said, feel their pain. Yes. If I can feel their pain, I'm then moving in empathy with them. But feeling their pain doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about it. Feeling someone's pain, understanding and feeling one's pain that's a step. To feel the pain of another is the beginning, that's empathy. But then we could begin to say, but if I actually want to do something out of my understanding and out of my empathy, then it becomes a deed. It becomes a deed of compassion. So compassion is actually understanding and empathy brought into the will, where it becomes deed. Yeah? So we perform deeds of compassion. Compassion is actually an understanding and a feeling brought into movement, where we actually then give something. Yeah? So maybe the two poles of the will would be a kind of giving. Let's just try this one out. A kind of giving on the one hand and a withholding of the will on the other. May not be the right one, but let's try it out. So I can be giving my will, or I can be withholding my will. But if I can come into a right relationship with that, where my will is not paralyzed by fear, but in a certain sense I recognize the longing of another, I can then do something. I can then bring my feeling of empathy into a deed, and compassion can be the result of that deed. So compassion is actually a deed. It's a feeling of understanding, empathy that moves into the will. Does that make sense a little bit? So I may be redefining the way these words are used. Forgive me for doing so, but I'm trying to give a kind of a sense for this. Now, we have another problem, and that's the problem of the ego. Yeah? How do we overcome the ego? Yeah? How do we overcome the sense of self? Because we notice that the sense of self, the egoism, is really not ourself connecting ourselves to our angel, but rather it's the sense of having our will thwarted, suffering, becoming self-involved, and then turning into a kind of a little bundle of isolation and separation. Yeah. So there's a wonderful verse that Rudolf Steiner gives for a verse to strengthen the will. And you probably all know this. Most of you know the verse, victorious spirit, flame through the impotence of irresolute souls, burn out the egoism, ignite the compassion, that selflessness, yeah, the life stream of humankind well up as the source of spirit rebirth. Yeah. So that selflessness, so burn out the egoism and ignite the compassion. That selflessness, the life stream of humankind, well up as the source of spirit rebirth. What do those words really mean? Yeah. Who knows this verse? Yeah? Yeah? So this is a very powerful verse Rudolf Steiner gives. It's really dedicated in a certain sense to the Archangel Michael, who is our great hero. Michael is the great hero of our human striving, and also the one who helps us deal with the dragon of our own being, who helps us deal with the dragon of fear and hatred and doubt. Michael is the victorious spirit to whom we turn as the example of what a true human being can become. Yes. So Michael is the Archangel Michael, who actually is moving into the realm of a time spirit, is a very, very leading spirit, a very powerful spirit. And Michael is deeply connected. Michael was deeply connected with the human being through Jehovah, through Yahweh, and then Michael became deeply connected with the Christ being when Christ descended out of the cosmos and united with humanity, which is the week we're entering into now. We're entering into Holy Week, into the week of the last stages of this cosmic spirit, the Logos, descending fully into the body of a human being and uniting the higher spiritual world with the human world, with the world of egoism and doubt and hatred and fear. A being from the very highest realms of the spiritual hierarchy descended down through the hierarchies and actually united for 3 years with a human being, and united and felt everything that the human being feels, understood everything that the human being understands, became afraid of everything the human being fears, and took that on as its own destiny out of its great love and compassion, a deed of love and compassion. So Holy Week is called Holy Week because it's a time when, you could say, when doubt and hatred and fear had held sway, when doubt and hatred and fear had had their time on the earth. Doubt and hatred and fear also harden our sense of self. Every man for himself, every woman for himself, everybody for himself. We're all locked up. We all feel that we're locked up in our own personality. We feel that we're all just individuals, and nobody, don't you feel this? Nobody really understands me. Has anybody ever had that feeling? Yeah? Am I only one? So, nobody else understands me. You know? But the truth of the matter is, that's a very limited point of view. You know, but I need to come into that situation. Now, friends, let's take one more perspective. Let's say, was this just a bad joke? I mean, did the spiritual world just get together and say, let's put a bunch of beings together, let's send them down onto a planet where they will lose their complete touch with where their will be thwarted, where they will suffer, and where they will get completely self-involved. Let's play a little joke, you know, sitting around a campfire one day, the spiritual hierarchies will say, let's see what we can do to torture this next hierarchy that we're going to bring into being. Is that the goal? You know? Was the goal to kind of just bring us into this torturous situation? And the wonderful thing that Rudolf Steiner says, sometimes we feel that way, but that's not really the case. But Rudolf Steiner gives us the beautiful picture that the human being is membered into the spiritual hierarchy. That the spiritual hierarchy had evolved through cosmic evolution, through ancient Saturn, through ancient Sun, through ancient Moon, now came to the Earth evolution. There were things that happened even before ancient Saturn, if one can imagine such a thing. The spiritual hierarchies have been evolving, and God has been evolving through creating new beings who have new capacities, who create other beings who have new capacities, who create other beings who have new capacities. Where does it all end? It doesn't. Where did it all begin? Oh, my goodness. When? Yes. So this is one of these deep mysteries. Yes. But we could say the spiritual hierarchies evolve. This is the beautiful picture. They're not locked into a kind of a finite, limited being. God and the spiritual hierarchies are continuing to evolve. And one of the ways that they evolve is that they create beings who have capacities that they don't have. And they create situations where spiritual beings can evolve in situations that they couldn't enter into themselves. We all know that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Who are the fools? Yeah. We're all Parsifal. We are all pure fools. Yeah? So we are the fools who said, yes, we want to go and do something that none of you have ever been able to do. Yes, send me in, coach. I'm ready. I will do, I will save the day. I will make the last three-point shot and win the game. I will somehow save. So that's us, friends. We are brave. We need to recognize that the humanity itself is filled with courage. We really are brave. Fools rush in, yes, but we rush in out of a feeling we do have. We really initially weren't filled with fear at all. We were filled with tremendous enthusiasm. We were filled with God, and we were sent here to do something. However, slowly, one by one, the spiritual hierarchies began to vanish out of our perception. And in a certain sense, by vanishing from our perception, we lost touch with the kind of the obedient lawfulness of the spiritual world. And that was actually planned. Okay? It wasn't punishment. We weren't sent here to suffer. We were sent here to gradually begin to find the power within ourselves to overcome the darkness and the fear and the doubt and the hatred, and to generate the capacity for compassion, forgiveness, and love. And in so doing, we would then be known. There is love throughout the entire spiritual world. But love is present. I love what Mark Twain says. As long as we're present with the spiritual hierarchies and in the presence of God, we feel the love because the love is the substance of the Spirit. The love is the essence of the kingdom of God. It is the substance which unites all of us, love. But in a certain sense, when we lose touch with the spiritual hierarchies, we lose touch with the feeling of that love because it's not automatic anymore. Then we have to learn to generate it out of ourselves. So we left a situation where love was the substance that we lived in. We lived in the substance of love, but we were sent into a realm where it appears to us, at least from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, that there is some love in the world, but there's also some not love in the world. Yeah? Yeah. So to be sent into a situation where we lose touch with the source of love. So what Mark Twain said was, you must always obey your parents while they are present. You know? So we obey our parents. You know, we obey God. When we're in the presence of God, there's no question about love. It is the Spirit. Love is the Spirit that we live in. But when God appears not to be present, we lose touch with that love, then we begin to say, I'm missing something. I'm longing for something. Yeah? Something's not here. I'm longing for it, and so I'll go knocking on the door of the spiritual world, and maybe they'll let me back in, yeah? Because it's kind of cold and weary down here. So because it's a place of suffering and self-involvement and egoism. Can I take back my, can I get back in? I want, you know, this was not a good show. I'd like my money back. I want to go back into, but actually our job is not to go back. Our job is to go forward, you see? In a certain sense, we could say Buddha was correct. When he said it in the 6th century before Christ, Buddha said, you have gone too far. Time to retreat. Step back. You've entered too deeply into incarnation. You are completely subject to these illusions. You have a thirst for existence, but what you need to do is you need to recognize the source of your errors. You need to recognize the 4 great truths and follow the Eightfold Path. And gradually you need to purify your thirst for existence and retreat back into the spiritual world. And give up your self-involvement. Give up your egoism. You need to overcome yourself by surrendering it. Surrender your desires. Surrender your longing. Even surrender your longing to be united with God. And ultimately then you will achieve a state of spiritual union, but you won't remember anything, which is a problem. Yeah? Because by reuniting with the spiritual world, you won't know that you were on this journey. Yeah? So Buddha was absolutely correct. Buddha was absolutely correct. That is the right thing to do until the Spirit said, okay, they suffered long enough, now it's time to send the possibility of redemption, the possibility of change, of bringing this experiment to its next stage. So that's what we're beginning to celebrate. Holy Week, the last stage of the descent of this cosmic being who gives us the ability to overcome doubt, the ability to overcome hatred, the ability to overcome fear, the ability to understand, the ability to have empathy, the ability to have compassion, the ability to overcome self-involvement, to overcome suffering, and actually to turn our longing to the longing to give. Yeah. The longing to give. So friends, as children, we are fed, we are given warmth by our mother, we're given milk by our mother, we're given food by our mother until we leave home. Then she sends us boxes of cookies, yes, every birthday, yes, until that's no longer possible. So our mother continues to love us. God bless our mother. We need our mother. Yeah? Our mother sustains us. But in a certain sense, you could say, we all have been in the position of receiving love. But we now, Rudolf Steiner says, the whole of evolution depends on that we move from a state of receiving to a state of giving. Yeah. That's the whole thing. As children, we receive everything. But now we need to move into the place where we begin to generate it. And this is why we leave home. Why didn't we just stay home? Cooking was pretty good. 3 meals a day, bed, food, gas. I mean, it was pretty nice, wasn't it? Why did we leave home? We left home because we actually felt, I've received, you've given me enough. Now I feel the need to go out and challenge life and to see what I can begin to give. Yeah? So our own biography is a perfect picture of our whole journey. We left paradise. We ended into a place where we began to suffer. Rather, we can't go back through our mother's womb, but we can go forward and create something. We can learn to give. So we are meant to become spirits of freedom and love. That's the mission of humanity. Not love. There are spirits of love. Those are the spirits who stand directly in the presence of God. They're called the seraphim, and they're the spirits of love. And they are sublime love. They stand directly in the presence of God. But we are way down at the other end of the spectrum. Love is love that we have to, first we receive it, but then we lose it, and we long for it. But then we learn to generate it. We learn to generate love. Now, so the problem of relationships so we have to move from compassion to forgiveness. So it's one thing to have compassion for a person, but it's something else to forgive them. Yeah? So how do we generate that? So in a certain sense, we begin to say, Rudolf Steiner gives us this beautiful picture that, I'm going to erase these three words here, that we have, in our waking consciousness, we have our ego, we have our astral body, which is the source of our consciousness, we have our etheric body, which is the source of our life, and we have our physical body, which is our form. So very briefly, our physical body is the form that we see in front of us. The substances come and go, but the form, I still recognize Robert, and Robert still recognizes me, even though we haven't seen each other for a while. Yes? So we recognize the form. The substances of our body are continually moving in and out. But the form of our body remains intact for our lifetime. It just changed. A baby and a youth and a mature human being and an elderly person, but you can recognize the same form is existing through all the stages. So the physical body is basically our form, but the form also has the senses that we use to perceive the world. So the physical body contains our senses. And when we wake up, our ego, our sense of self, when we go to sleep, these members separate. Our etheric body is like the sun. It's the radiant life that's animating our physical body. When our etheric body, when we have overtaxed our etheric body, we feel tired, we feel fatigued. Yes? So our form is still there, but you say, how's your vitality today? Well, I'm a little tired. Or, I feel great. I have tremendous vitality. My etheric forces, I can really feel them. They're flowing. I can do anything. Yeah? So the etheric body is not the physical body, but it animates and sustains the life processes and gives life to us. And Rudolf Steiner says a spiritual seer can actually perceive the etheric body as this moving force that's completely, continually molding and shaping. He says you can't take a picture. If you try to draw, you can draw the form of the physical body, but the etheric body is always changing. It would be like trying to take a photograph of a fire in a fireplace. It's always moving, it's always changing. The etheric body is always mobile, it's flowing, and it's healing, and it's connected also with the greater source of life itself. The etheric body is connected with a greater life source. Physical body are formed with the senses. The astral body is our consciousness. The astral body has within it the feeling, the sensitivities that we feel. It's our inner response. So we have a sense impression, and because our senses are filled with life, that sense impression goes from an outer reality into an inner experience. The astral body is our inner world. Yeah? We have an outer world that's around us, but we also have an inner world. The astral body is our inner world. So the astral body in our inner world, it's our reflection of what's going on. It's our inner knowing, our inner sense of what's going on outside of us. And in that inner self, I don't feel I feel myself separate because I have an inner self, because I feel an inner response to something outside me. That's the beginning of longing. The fact that I do feel separate because there's something that I can sense outside me, and yet my inner self doesn't feel directly connected to it. Therefore, I have a longing to connect myself to that. But because I'm living in a body, I can't do that. Yeah? And everywhere I go, I carry myself with me. I want to go on vacation. It'd be really nice to get away from myself, but everywhere I go, doggone it, there it is again. You know? So the inner self is also the part that experiences the longing and the suffering and the self-involvement. That's where most of this is going on. Most of this is going on in the astral body. Yeah? But and you could say the ego is the messenger of the spirit, but it's not fully awake yet. The ego, Rudolf Steiner gives us the picture that even though the cosmic logos descended into the body of Jesus for 3 years and went through the crucifixion and kindled the I in every human being, the I is really initially only a kind of messenger. It's a messenger of the true spirit. The true spirit is the spirit self, our true self. So friends, don't we all say, in my heart of hearts, my true self really recognizes something. My ego doesn't really want to recognize it. My lower self doesn't really want to agree. But my true self, if I can overcome myself, I actually can come into a sense of inner connectedness, yeah, with truth. I can really, in my true self, lift myself above myself. So the ego initially is the messenger of the spirit self, but because it involves itself primarily with the astral body, and it lives in the reflections, it experiences the ego, rather than being able to completely connect with the spirit, which it longs to do, it actually connects more with the feeling of longing and the feeling of suffering and the feeling of self-involvement that lives in the astral body. So the ego tends to become self-involved. And as Buddha said, we have a thirst for existence because there is a remnant from our previous incarnations that the ego and the astral body and the etheric body bear. They bear memory from previous lives, and that memory gives us the longing it gives us a feeling that we do exist and we don't want to surrender ourselves. I have to ask you a question, friends, and this is an interesting question. Please don't take offense. Suppose an archangel appeared at the door and said, all of you can instantly be united with God. You can instantly leave your body. You will go up into the rapture, which is another interesting idea. You will go up into the rapture and you will be completely absorbed. You will be completely reunited with God, but you won't know anything. You will lose everything that you have gained. You will lose your whole biography. You lose your talents. You lose your skills. You lose your memories. You won't know that you're united with God, but you will be united with God. Okay? Anybody interested? I think, you see, interesting picture, because we have won something through our thirst for existence. You see, this is the pearl of great price. We don't really want to surrender that, because we've worked hard to get there. It took a lot. It took a lot of longing, a lot of suffering, a lot of self-involvement for the sense of egoism to really evolve. And to a certain sense, we are attached to it. Yeah. So it is difficult to surrender and be reunited, but be obliterated in our consciousness. That doesn't feel correct, does it? No. Why did we come down here if we're just going to be obliterated and reunited with the divine all and not know? Yeah. So we want to know. You see, we want to know that. So this is also the seed of heroism and courage and foolishness and foolhardiness that's been placed into the human being. We want to go back to the spiritual world, but we want to keep everything that we have intact, don't we? Yeah. I don't want to give up a thing. I just want to I just want to take all my stuff back in the spiritual world and still have my Starbucks and, and my email and all the lovely people in my life, yeah? But so I want to keep everything I've gained. So this is a real riddle. So in a certain sense, we can also say that the Christ event, more or less, the descent of this cosmic logos into humanity kindled the tool through which we don't have to go back. We can actually go forward. We can actually take hold of our suffering. We can take hold of our self-involvement. We can take hold of our longing, and we can begin to move. We have been knocking primarily at the door of our desires and our inner life, but we can also turn our attention, and this is the challenge of our time. The challenge of our time is that we are self-involved with egoism so long as we're only looking into our own thwarted will, yeah? Self-involvement. But our true self, our higher self, lies in this direction. So in a certain sense, we have to overcome ourself. Yeah? We have to overcome ourself. We have to forget for a moment that we're the only one here and maybe take an interest in somebody else. Yeah? We have to realize that we don't really understand. I could be wrong. Yeah? Maybe there's other points of view. Yeah? We have to develop empathy. We have to develop compassion. And in so doing, we gradually can move. So basically what happens when we wake up, our ego operates through the senses, and through the senses we have a connection with the world, but we have a desire to exist in the sense world. But when we lift ourselves toward our higher self, toward the spirit self, where the angel actually holds our identity for us, where our noble self, the self that's striving for truth, beauty, and goodness, where that really resides, the longing for that is called the consciousness soul. So the consciousness soul is the part of our self that's longing to connect to the spirit. The consciousness soul is knocking on the door of the spirit, just like the sentient soul is knocking on the door of our body. It's connected with our sense world. So it's called the sentient soul because the sentient soul is the part of us that experiences the world through our senses and finds satisfaction. But the consciousness soul, the spiritual soul, is a part of our ego that actually borders our true self. If we can begin to operate through the consciousness soul towards spirit self, we lift ourselves up into a higher realm, and we gain the capacity for understanding, we gain the capacity for empathy, and we even gradually can gain the capacity for compassion. So first of all, it's a problem of cognition. Because we think we are the only ones here, we have to begin to extend our sensing and our thinking beyond ourselves. We have to get beyond self-involvement. So that means we need to sensitize ourselves. This is why in Waldorf education the arts are so important. The arts sensitize our senses. Practicing music, practicing painting, practicing drawing, practicing drama, speaking poems, and involving ourselves in creative activity, it enlivens, it sensitizes us to the world, and it also sensitizes us to one another. So we begin to ennoble our senses through the arts. The arts are very important, and because we then begin to become sensitized, we realize when we're doing eurythmy that I'm not the only one in the circle. Yeah, that in fact, I have to begin to move. Then in our sensitivity, we begin to move with one another. We begin to feel more a kinship. So we begin to feel more with the etheric body. We begin to feel more united with our fellow human being. Eurythmy is a particular gift in that way. If you're doing expansion and contraction in eurythmy or doing a eurythmy form, you begin to feel connected with other people. And in your movements, the whole organism begins to come to life. You begin to feel your affinity with the etheric body. Now, the etheric body, if we can lift ourselves into the consciousness of the etheric body, this is the realm where we're connected with all of life. We're connected with all of life in our etheric body. So when we begin to feel ourselves more connected with all of life, and we begin to elevate our consciousness, we begin to knock on the door of our spirit self, then the spirit self begins to perceive, just as the ego was using the physical body to experience the sense world and to have its thirst for existence, if we can begin to lift ourselves to the spirit self then begins to use the etheric body to feel its connection with all of life. And to feel connected with all of life is actually then the beginning of compassion and the beginning of forgiveness. When we really feel ourselves connected with all of life, we then begin to realize that that the wounding that I was doing and the wounding that I was experiencing from other people, when I overcome myself, I overcome my egoism, I move up the ladder, I then begin to feel myself connected with all of life. I begin to take interest in my fellow beings. Then all of a sudden, my consciousness is moved out of myself into the sense that I am connected with everything. I am connected with all of humanity. I'm connected with all of the animal kingdom. I'm connected with the plant kingdom. And I'm connected through these kingdoms with the whole of life. This is the value that plants and animals have for us. Friends, when your cat is crying for its meal, and what are you going to say? Anybody stay in bed and let the cat cry? So the cat is asking for compassion. The cat isn't asking for empathy. The cat isn't asking for understanding. The cat is asking for you to do something. Compassion. Yes, one thing to have empathy. Yeah, I understand you're hungry. Yeah, I feel your pain. No, get up and feed the cat. That's what the cat wants. Do something, you see? So we can move from understanding and empathy to a deed. So compassion means we then do something. So we can begin to move ourselves. So as we begin to move ourselves into this realm, the interesting thing is, when this cosmic spirit united with the earth and united with humanity and kindled the eye, it really kindled our link with our higher members and kindled also a way we can overcome ourselves. And what happens is this being no longer lives in the sense world. This cosmic spirit united with the physical body for 3 years and united with the earth. But this cosmic spirit, called the Logos or the Christ, now lives in the etheric world. This being, the being of the Logos, is actually living in the world of life, and his life, the life that we live, is actually connected with this being. It is the grace of this being that we're living. So what begins to happen is if we move our consciousness out of our egoism and more into our higher self, we can then begin to perceive our connection through all of life, and we begin to actually live more in compassion and empathy and feeling and even forgiveness, because we realize that this being is in fact connected with all of life and that we are connected with all of life. So the overcoming of self, forgetting ourself, but then we learn, because we feel connected with one another, we then begin to generate the capacity for understanding, compassion, forgiveness. Forgiveness begins to live at that level. So you could say we begin to have forgiveness. If we can move up to this consciousness, forgiveness is the result. So we could say compassion, forgiveness. Yeah? We can begin to move from compassion to forgiveness. There was a man named George Ritchie who wrote a book called Return from Life After Life? Return from the Future, George Ritchie. And George Ritchie had, as a young man, he actually had a near-death experience. He felt himself, he became very ill, he had the flu, and he actually experienced himself leaving his body and astral traveling, literally, his ego and his astral body severed themselves from the etheric body. His body was dying. He felt himself traveling long distances, but then he came to a place where he met a radiant being, and in the presence of this being, he felt completely humble, and he also felt a bit ashamed. Yeah? But this being was not calling up shame and humility. Just in the presence of this being, he just felt standing next to this being. In the presence of this being, he realized how imperfect he was in the face of the glory and the radiant generosity and compassion of this being. And this being, he said, this being did not speak to him, but he met this being in the etheric world. This is the being of the cosmic Christ. And this being, he said, this being, the very presence of this being said, said without moving his words, without speaking, the feeling that he had meeting this being was, what have you done with your life? Now that should awaken some conscience, yeah? What have you done with your life? And what he realized was, he was a young man, he was 18 years old, he realized that he hadn't done very much. And because he realized that he hadn't done very much, a kind of desire in the presence of this being arose in him. I want to go back and do something. I haven't done anything yet. In fact, I'm not very proud of what I've done. And so, in the presence of this being, the impulse to return to life came back. So he flew back across. He flew back across the country. He found the hospital. The interesting thing was he found the morgue where his body, they put him in a body bag, and he found his body. He couldn't tell which body was his. But he looked at he could perceive somehow he was coming back enough into a relationship of his sensing that he could recognize the school ring. The high school that he went to, he had a ring on his finger, was high school ring. He recognized his high school ring, and so he slipped back into that body. And the body bag began to move, and the people in the morgue got nervous, and they unzipped it, and he sat up. Yeah? So George Ritchie came back from this near-death experience, but he came back with a completely new impulse. He decided to devote himself to others, and he decided that he would love everybody that he came into connection with. Yeah? And that he wanted to do something with his life. So he became interested and became a doctor. He ended up going at the end of the war. This was in 1943 when he had this experience. A couple years later, he must have been 20 or 21, at the end of the war, he ended up in a German concentration camp as one of the doctors trying to help people who were completely starving from malnutrition, they were starving to death. And he says there was very little we could do. But there was one person in the camp who was upright, bright-eyed, enthusiastic, spoke 5 languages, and he went from person to person interpreting. He could interpret. In fact, everybody in the camp had been completely dependent on this one person because he mediated between conflicts, he assisted people, he spoke 5 languages, and somehow this person was completely upright, bright, and so they all thought, the doctors that went into the prison camp thought, this man must have just gotten here, yes? And they asked him how long he'd been there. He'd been there since 1939. He'd been there for 6 years. He was one of the oldest surviving prisoners. And they said, how come you're not malnourished? How come you're not starving to death? And he said, tell us your story. And he was very reluctant to do so. But he gradually said, I lived in Warsaw with my wife and my 3 sons and 2 children, my three daughters and 2 sons. And when the Nazis took over, they shot my wife and my 5 children. So the 6 people that were dearest to me were killed in front of my eyes. And I had been a lawyer, but I had seen what hatred does to people. We had hatred up here. I'd seen what hatred had done to people's souls and bodies. And when they killed my family, I made a decision that I would forgive them and that I would love every human being that I came into contact with. Yeah. So he overcame himself. He overcame his attachment. He lifted himself up into this, and for this reason, he says, they didn't kill me because I spoke 5 languages and they thought maybe I could be useful to them. So he was put in a prison camp, but he ended up being completely connected with the source of life, and no matter how deprived other people were, he didn't need any better than the others. He just was connected with all of life. In a certain sense, he was connected with the source of this being of compassion and forgiveness. And in his ability to have compassion and forgive, in his ability to love other people, in his intention. You see, to love other people is an intention. It doesn't just happen. We have to intend it. So on the one hand, we have to overcome ourselves. On the other hand, we have to decide to love everyone that we come into contact with. And that means striving to understand them, striving to have empathy, striving to have compassion, and striving to forgive them for the trespasses that they have. Because forgiveness is then, you could say, the understanding that turns to forgiveness is where we feel our connection. We realize that the reason this person has trespassed is because I don't understand them, or they don't understand me. So it's not a sense of ill will. Most of the trespasses are just, we don't understand. But if we really could understand the source of the other person, if we really could begin to understand, something would change. So the capacity for forgiveness then becomes a source of life. When we begin to forgive somebody, what happens is that forgiveness it connects us with the whole of life, and it actually becomes substance that we are nourishing others with. We nourish, when we learn to love, we learn to nourish one another. So the love that we generate for one another actually becomes a source of life. And that life becomes substance that unites all of us. So forgiveness is actually a deed. Yeah? Having compassion is a deed, and then taking it further, not only do I have compassion, am I trying to do something to help another person, I also will forgive those who have trespassed against me, either intentionally or unintentionally. Yes. I will understand them. I will realize, in fact, I might even realize that I am partly responsible for the trespass myself. In fact, that would have to do with my karma. Yeah? If I would begin to understand my karma better, I would understand that. The thing I didn't write up here was evil. Evil is the work of the adversarial beings who harden our thinking into doubt, who harden our feeling into hatred, and who harden our fear into, who harden our will into fear. So there are adversarial beings. So you could say, we have to confront evil. It's not just a question of who gets to go first at the stoplight in terms of forgiveness. There are also our beings who are working through other beings to actually to do things which will bring evil about in the world. So forgiveness does not mean we don't recognize the presence of evil. We recognize the presence of evil, but we choose rather to see, and there is some humanity in every human being, even a human being who's been taken over by an adversarial force, who is inflicting through their suffering, through their own giving way to the adversarial forces. They are inflicting evil, they are inflicting suffering on other people. There is still a human being there. The degree to which we can love the human being, yeah, brings us into a place where we actually move up from the realm of having to hate them and fall back into egoism and blame. Rather, we begin to say we generate then something which actually can begin to heal them as well. Because people who have been consumed in service to the adversarial beings are also suffering. And they also are incurring karma that they don't understand. And this is why on the cross, one of the last things that Christ says is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If we really understood the karma that we incur by hurting another person, by inflicting injury on another person, if we really realized that the whole spiritual world then will help us in a later life come back to a situation where we will confront that person and have the chance to redeem ourselves and have the chance to heal that person, that really is what karma is about. Karma is not punishment. Karma is a chance for a do-over. Yeah? It's a chance in another life to come back and meet the situation where we did something incorrectly and where we gave way to our egoism. Rather, it's a chance to redeem ourselves and also to offer substance back, to try to give what we withheld, to try to provide what we failed to provide, to try to do the good instead of holding back, instead of doing something less than that. So we could say, if we begin to understand the power of forgiveness, we begin to realize that we're taking our karma in hand. If we can actually actively forgive someone in this life, the spiritual world, imagine, friends, that you come, at a certain point in your life, you meet somebody who you have extreme antipathy for. By the way, the symptom of a karmic relationship is extreme sympathy for the person. That means that you've known them before, or extreme antipathy for the person. That means you've known them before. Yeah? And those, if we're kind of mediating in between, well, maybe not. But boy, if we really love somebody or we really can't stand them, that's a symptom. We've known this person before. But now the question is, if we feel antipathy for a person, we can then begin to say, how many You know, how many different connections had to be made that when I was 42, I could meet this particular person at this particular point in my life. Imagine the strings the spiritual hierarchies had to pull to arrange us to meet at this point in time, to give me an opportunity to redeem myself. That's really what the spiritual world is doing. They're really involving, they're pulling the strings, making sure that we encounter each other so we get a chance to redeem ourselves and to heal each other. But if we forgive each other in this life, we begin to participate in our own karma. We begin to free the spiritual world from the need to trouble themselves to keep making us run into each other. And what happens is then that power that would have been involved from the spiritual hierarchies in helping weave the threads of karma, that power, that intensity that the spiritual world needs to involve us becomes grace. That power, instead of having to weave their webs of destiny together, they continue to give themselves, but that power then becomes grace. So in a place of karma, we have grace. And the grace comes about because forgiveness existed, because we began consciously to forgive and to ask forgiveness. Then, in a certain sense, we free up those forces of karma, and they become grace which nourishes all of life. So to forgive not only is a healing of oneself, not only is it a healing of the other person, it also then triggers a power that lives and contributes to the etheric world and brings more life and more health to everybody. The whole world becomes healthier when one person forgives another. Now, we've got a few minutes for questions. We'll take a break in about 7 minutes. Are there questions or anything? I've talked at you for a long time. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thoughts, questions, ideas?
Well, just the thought of how I identify myself with, like, who am I, with my beliefs or whatever causes me conflict.
Yes, yes.
It just keeps kind of coming up.
Yeah.
And you haven't exactly said it, but it's just something that I keep thinking about, that it's kind of a dissolving of who I identify myself to be.
That's right. Yeah, that who we identify ourselves to be really becomes, we have attached ourselves to particular thoughts, particular feelings, and particular ideas. And so that becomes our sense of self. Yeah? And we're reluctant to, we don't want to surrender it. The ego really realizes that it has achieved this through a lot of struggle. Yeah? And the ego is reluctant. The ego doesn't want to let it go.
It's kind of scary.
It is.
It's frightening.
It is. Yeah. It truly is. Yeah. So what we have to, that's right. But the wonderful thing is, we don't have to surrender it, but we can take a step forward above it. I could be wrong. And it doesn't mean that we're not losing anything by doing so. We think that we're going to lose something by stepping up into that. But actually, we don't lose something, we actually gain something. Yeah? So we gain a higher perspective that then we begin even to understand our why we are attached to those particular ideas and those particular thoughts. And it gives us the possibility to gradually to reshape ourselves as well, to begin to expand ourselves into a bigger, more spiritual person. Will? Yeah.
Earlier on you said that we all feel like nobody really understands ourselves.
Yes.
Us.
Yes.
But if you look at it, and then how do we really understand ourselves if nobody really understands ourselves? But if you look at it that everybody understands a little bit of ourselves,
Yes.
a tiny bit of ourselves,
Yes.
that connects us to everybody else.
It does.
Which helps us to bring it back to ourselves and feel okay with ourselves.
Yes.
And then that sort of helps the whole collective consciousness.
Absolutely right. So even a small deed of compassion, a small deed of recognition, all of a sudden it lifts us out of the kind of the lower, the self-involvement. It lifts us. When somebody does something kind to us, smiles at us even, yeah. When we recognize each other and actually give something to one another, something happens that changes our whole day. It may be the bright point of our entire day, and all of a sudden we do feel more connected with the whole of life. We're not just clinging with our desires and our attachments to who we are and what we're suffering and what we want, but we begin to be grateful. Gratitude is a great part of that. Being grateful, yeah? Recognition. So gratitude, openness. Yeah? Sometimes go ahead. Yes.
I also have a question
Yes.
So it's often spoken about as something that is an outward gesture for the all of humanity. But
Yes.
having that same will force for yourself, how that affects the whole.
Right. I think again, there's a danger in self-forgiveness, and there's a joy in self-forgiveness. Yeah. The danger of self-forgiveness is it could just be another trap. You know, I forgive myself for being such a, so filled with desire. I forgive myself but in a certain sense, I've just given myself permission to continue a form of behavior I'm not very proud of. Yeah. So I could rather say, perhaps I can begin to give more. I can forgive myself for my weaknesses, but I can recognize them as weaknesses, and I'm going to strive to improve my control of the expression of my desire. So I don't relinquish the desire, but I begin to say, I can do better. I can be more selective. I can begin to prune. I can begin to ennoble. I can begin to take my desire and move it not only towards self-satisfaction, but actually I can take my desire and actually move it toward giving something to others. Yeah. I have to say, as a teacher, friends, it's one of the great benefits of being a teacher is that, particularly being a melancholic teacher, the tendency to sink into this is very strong with me. Yeah? And the fact that I have to stand up in front of a group of people most days of my life and try to overcome myself and try to lift myself into this realm is actually helpful to me. I'm grateful to all of you that you allow me to give this talk. I'm grateful to all my students because they allow me an opportunity to overcome myself. Because without them, I would really be miserable and so yes, go ahead. Yes.
So I really appreciate the overview of all of these different aspects of our thinking and feeling, and in this time, you're talking about polarities, and it seems like the polarities have, in some senses, intensified, where we have, so many people losing their houses, losing their jobs, not having health care.
Right.
I just was hearing somebody who had been in the Congo, and how many people just live in a state of trauma.
Right.
And actually dissociated and sort of excarnated.
Right.
And so we have that polarity, and then we have this other polarity of, people having, I get like 10 emails a day of different organizations
Right.
that are doing amazing work.
Yes.
Michaelic work in the world. And so there are these two polarities, and it seems like they're much more extreme than they have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you see that polarity that we're feeling in our society.
Thank you. I think one of the things we have to deal with in our age is that we can't overcome evil, but we need to learn to confront it. Yeah? So we're given opportunities every day to confront the adversaries. We don't yet have the power to completely overcome them. We will gradually gain the power to overcome and redeem them. But meeting evil in the world, evil does exist, and by meeting evil, we can then we can begin to cognize it, and we don't forget. We do not it's not that we allow evil to continue to work in the world. We should. Compassion doesn't mean that we just allow people to continue to inflict suffering on each other. Rather, it means that we try to do something to participate in a way that will be helpful, that will also allow forgiveness to happen. But I agree with you. I think the polarization is, on the one hand, we are trying to become truly human. We're trying to begin to move in the age of the consciousness soul toward this higher self. And in the same way, the adversaries are stepping up their attacks to show us what we're not. So we have to then begin to see. And the Manichaean path is then not to say, I will destroy evil, but rather I will unite myself with the evil and transform it into goodness, which is we're not quite ready for that yet. Rudolf Steiner speaks about Manichaeism, but he says, most of humanity, we need to work on developing the consciousness of ourself before we're going to be capable of healing the evil. But gradually, that is our destiny. The evil is there. These adversarial beings are doing what they're doing on our behalf. They're also suffering. They're playing a role. It's a difficult point to take, but they're also suffering. They have put themselves into a position where they are doing something that really violates their own nature. And only when we have learned what to overcome them and learn to transform that tendency within ourselves, are they out of a job? And then we can help them reunite with their true spiritual destiny, because they're playing a role, and it's not an easy role for them to play. We could gradually extend our compassion to the adversaries. We're not yet ready to do that yet, but we need to be capable of doing that. Yes, thank you.
What you were saying earlier, an archangel came to the door and
Yes.
said, do we have any takers to
Yes.
dissolve into
Yes.
divine consciousness and completely let go of ego and identity?
Yes.
This is something I've actually wondered about a lot, is that those who choose to undertake that, who choose to achieve nirvana, so to speak, if they're actually bringing something intangible from this experience into divine consciousness that could perhaps actually be aiding in the ultimate evolution of God or divine consciousness.
Yes. Well, certainly that's true of the bodhisattvas. But I think that also, yes, you could say if a human being intentionally did that in order to bring the news to the spiritual world, that would be a deed. And on the other hand, you could say, but the destiny of humanity is not to retreat. The destiny of humanity is actually to become spirits of freedom and love. And to some degree, if we did choose just to retreat back and if we kept our compassion and active relationship with humanity, that's one thing. But if we just retreat to get off the wheel of evolution and not have to participate anymore, then Rudolf Steiner says at the end of Knowledge of Higher Worlds, this is the last chapter, the last chapter, chapter 11, if we choose, if we achieve spiritual consciousness, we will stay then at that level. But the rest of humanity will gradually bypass us. If we decide not to involve ourselves with humanity anymore, we will find a niche in the spiritual world. It's not going to be a very high niche. And the rest of humanity gradually will transform us and leave us there, and that's where we'll be. But if we come back and participate, if we bring what we have given to the divine consciousness and come back to help assist humanity by incarnation, then we're actually lifting the whole of humanity forward. So again, we have to see that it's a fine-edged division. But I appreciate what you said very much. If it truly was a sacrificial deed, I think what would happen if a person became a messenger for the suffering of humanity with that intention, that they probably would then be sent in this, okay, thank you for the news, get back in there and see what you can do about it. You know? Yes.
Piggybacking on that, does that mean that we would have to have like more to deal with, like the people that are behind? Would we have like more work to do in some way if other people like were to leave? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'll ask you later.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's think about it. We do need to take a break, friends, because we don't want to interfere with Robert's time. Yeah.
Are you saying that suffering is not something we're just trying to get away from, but the particular elements of suffering in our own lives, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and that's the place where we can do the work
Suffering
to
actually,
overcome it?
suffering does ennoble us. When suffering actually does purify something in us. We often suffer because of something we did in a previous life that we did incorrectly. So that comes back to us as an opportunity to suffer. But by suffering through it, our higher self is actually purified and ennobled not to make the same mistake we made before. So suffering actually is a blessing. Now there is suffering which we have earned, and there is also suffering which we haven't earned. Not very much. Most of the suffering we've earned. But occasionally suffering will be inflicted that has not been earned. And Rudolf Steiner says the spiritual world compensates for suffering unearned in the next incarnation, by bestowing beauty. Beauty is actually the spiritual world's compensation for suffering not earned in a previous life. Interesting way to look at beauty, yeah? Beauty is actually the spiritual world's compensation for suffering inflicted, not earned. Most of the suffering that we've earned doesn't make us beautiful, but the suffering that has been inflicted, the spiritual world will take that suffering and metamorphose it into beauty. Now we could also say, what is the karma of beauty? That's a whole other question, but we begin to see that. I think we should take a break, and we will have a chance after Robert speaks for questions about Robert, and then we'll come back to a round conversation. Is that okay? Thank you.